was leased by a guy named John Freeman. Like most people up here in upstate New York, John Freeman did not own the land that he lived on. Most people had to lease their land. They were tenant farmers. They were leasing from, you could call them the vestiges of the old Dutch patroon system. And these folks, very wealthy typically, owned a lot of land that they had inherited, much of which since the 17th century. And they were happy to lease out their land to people like John Freeman. And so John Freeman was leasing land here, 150 acres of land. The person he was leasing from was Philip Schuyler. Thank you. So indeed, Freeman's Farm, the place where the Battle of Freeman's Farm took place 246 years ago, was property that was actually owned by Philip Schuyler. Philip Schuyler owned over 100,000 acres of land in various places throughout upstate New York, and this was one of those lots that he owned. So as for John Freeman, he was married to a woman named Ethelana, and they had children, somewhere between 6 and 8 children. They lived here on the property where you see that tree. That's the area where their log cabin was located. They had a barn located over here, just before the land dips down into that slight ravine. They had a barn right there on this side of the hill, this side of the ravine. And they had at least one outbuilding on the extreme southern side of the farm. The farm was cleared by about 10 to 12 acres. So they were leasing 150 acres of land, but relatively little of it was actually cleared. The cultivation was occurring down on that open field down there that you see. That's where most of the cultivation was occurring. They had their lawn up here. All of it was fenced in by wooden rail or worm fence, as they called it. And on the southern side of the field, we know from the mapping that that was where they intended to expand their farm, because the mapping shows a lot of standing dead trees on the property. Those were girdled trees. Basically, it was typical for, if you were wanting to clear an area of trees, you would cut around the bark, remove the bark, cut around the tree. You don't actually cut the tree down. You just kill the tree by cutting around it, and the tree dies over the course of time, and then it just naturally collapses, and it makes it easier to clear the land. So that's what they were doing over there. They had a lot of sheep here and some milk cows, a couple of horses, you know. As for the Freemans, you might know that they were Royalist Americans, aka Loyalists, aka Tories, to use the pejorative. They wouldn't like to be called Tories. They find that term offensive. But they were certainly loyal to the crown. They were loyal to the crown. They did not like the idea of the United States. They did not like the idea of this rebellion against legitimate government. So the Freemans, when they hear that the British Army is coming, and that the Freemans know that most of their neighbors are ardent revolutionaries, the Freemans are seeking refuge with the British. Not from the British, Most people living in the corridor of this Hudson River Valley had skedaddled from their homes because the British are coming, so to speak. They don't want to be around when the British enter because they see the British as the enemy, because we're citizens of the new United States. But the Freemans and some others that lived up here were different. They were loyalists. They joined Burgoyne's army as it progresses south. John Freeman himself becomes a private soldier in one of the new royalist corps that's being recruited during the course of the expedition, as does his eldest son, Thomas Freeman. So these two guys, John the father, Thomas the son, they're combatants in Burgoyne's army. But you can see that the farm was abandoned by the time of the First Battle of Saratoga. There would have been probably more trees than what you see. Like I said, only about 10 to 12 acres of land was cleared. So what you see is more than that. There's a reason for it. We have the battlefield landscape sculpted in a field force configuration appropriate to the day of the Second Battle of Saratoga, where more trees had been cleared for lines of fire and building fortifications and the like. So you have to imagine in your mind's eye that there were more trees. We would have been kind of surrounded. It would have been felt more close in because these were canopy trees. These were high trees. All the trees that you're seeing here, this is most of it grew up since the 1930s and 40s. The trees that were here at the time were hundreds of years old on average. You know, some of them were younger, of course, but a lot of high canopy trees with not much undergrowth, meaning you could go into the woods and you could see for quite a distance between the trunks. You can imagine a forest like that. And that was what surrounded Freeman's abandoned farm. Now it's the morning of the 19th of September. The British commander, John Burgoyne, knows that the American commander, Major General Horatio Gates, has his what was called Northern Army, the American Army, located at Bemis Heights. Bemis Heights is about 1.5 miles south of us. Stops 2 and 3 on the tour road is where the American camp was located, between stops 2 and 3. Horatio Gates's Northern Army was there, and because of the way that the fortifications were set up, they were preventing Burgoyne from getting to Albany unfettered. So Burgoyne understood fully that in order to get to Albany, he had to battle the American army. Somehow, somewhere, he had to fight it. And so when he set off with his full army south toward Bemis Heights on the morning of the 19th of September, Burgoyne fully expected to fight that day. So there was not going to be a surprise battle. The question was, where was the battle going to take place? And what elements of the army were going to be engaged? So what Burgoyne did was he had his army pack up all their stuff, their carts, their wagons, all of their provisions. The soldiers were issued with 3 days worth of provisions. That's over 9 pounds of food on every one of their persons. They also had their tents packed up on carts, knapsacks. Every single soldier had 100 rounds of ammunition on their person, and every one of those cartridges had a lead ball in it, so you can imagine lead, a lot of lead, that's heavy stuff, you know. So they packed up their camp. The British forces divide themselves into 3 different columns. Burgoyne, of course, commands the whole, and he will be present with the center of the 3 columns. But the column to the extreme west, that was commanded by Brigadier General Simon Fraser. Simon Fraser commanded about 3,000 troops, the elite of Burgoyne's army. The most elite British and German soldiers are with Simon Fraser, and like I said, about 3,000 of them. The center column, which would come right through here, was commanded by Brigadier General James Hamilton. A lot of Scotsmen commanding brigades, I guess, in Burgoyne's army now, and Burgoyne is with them. He has with him about 1,700 troops, so a little more than half what Fraser had. Then over on the extreme east, down by the river, marching along the river road south, was a column commanded by Major General Friedrich Riedesel. He is the commander of the German element of Burgoyne's army, and he's also the 3rd in command of Burgoyne's army fully. So he commands about 3,000 troops, about 3,000 combatant troops. There are actually more people with his column because he has all of the women, all of the children, all of the refugees, all of the non-combatant laborers and the like. They're down there as well. But insofar as combatant forces, he's got about 3,000. So you see Burgoyne's army, combatant-wise, consists of about 7,700. The American army has about the same. The numbers are about the same. They're about equal insofar as the actual combatants between the two forces. The question is how much of the armies are going to be engaged, because rarely do full armies, everybody on both sides engage in battle. It's typically elements of the armies that are going to engage, and the case is no different here. So at the sign of a signal gun, a cannon that shot, the sound which informed the three commanders that they would move simultaneously south, you had the three columns advance late that morning. The center of the two columns, Burgoyne was with them himself, like I said, is going to traverse the Great Ravine. If you came up from US Route 4, you took that long snaking road up to the park's visitor center. You go under the park bridge there, the Tour Road Bridge. That's the Great Ravine. So Burgoyne's army went from the north side of the Great Ravine on a road and up the other side. And right away, late morning, they encountered some American sentinels. The thing about armies, if you're smart, is you're going to deploy pickets and sentinels, a screening force in advance of your main body. You don't want your main body of troops all together bumbling along a road and be surprise attacked by an enemy. You don't want that. You want to have troops acting as a screen in advance of you. And so that when an enemy is to be encountered, the screening force encounters them first. And then you have some time to react smartly to that threat. And Burgoyne was doing that very thing. He's going to have his screening force come out of the Great Ravine, and like I said, they encounter American sentinels. When those shots were fired between the sentinels and the British center column in the late morning of the 19th of September, word went back pretty fast to the American camp that the British were on the move. And so Benedict Arnold, the de facto second in command of the Northern Army, decided that, all right, it's time. Let's do battle with the British. He had actually tried to fight the British the day before. He went out with his division. Gates let him do it. And it came to naught. There was no battle that occurred because the British would not bite. And Arnold went back. But you can imagine he's itching for a fight. And he knows that now is the time, the 19th of September. So he says to Gates, can I go out with my division and attack the British, just like I wanted to do yesterday on the 18th of September? Gates said, no, we're not going to do that. It is unquestionable that the British are advancing upon us. We're not going to go out into the woods and bumble around and etc. We're going to make sure that our lines are perfectly protected since the enemy is on a march, as opposed to yesterday when they were sitting in camp. And Arnold pressed the issue. He wanted to go out and fight. And so Gates and Arnold came to a compromise. Gates said, all right, I'll tell you what. You can go out with the Virginia and Pennsylvania Riflemen, commanded by Colonel Daniel Morgan of Virginia. You can go out with the New England Light Infantry Battalion, commanded by Major Henry Dearborn. And you can have those two forces go out, scout the enemy, skirmish with the enemy, and hinder their advance. Harass their advance was the term specifically. And, by the time the British forces then are able to attack us here at our lines at Bemis Heights, we'll be fully prepared and waiting for them, and they will have been bloodied during the process. The enemy will have been bloodied during the process. So Arnold thought that was a fine idea. Gates also said, quote, you may support them if necessary, meaning you can support Morgan and Dearborn if necessary. If things get bad and they get in dire straits, you can support them. So out goes Morgan, out goes Dearborn. And the way they were marching was in a big, long, snaking column with the riflemen in front, the light infantry in back. They snaked around. They would have been at the area of stop number 2 on our tour road. They marched through paths, through the woods, and it's out of the southern side of Freeman's farm that this long snaking column advanced. Now, the front company of riflemen was a Pennsylvania company of riflemen commanded by a guy named Van Swearingen. And you know he's in the front because his name is Van. Thank you. So, it's true, I didn't make it up. So, Swearingen's guys, they come out of the wood line, again with the riflemen and the light infantry backed up behind them. Simultaneously, we're talking at about 12:30. What time is it now? Ish?
25.
Oh, that's good, right? Daylight savings time. So it would have been about this time, literally 246 years ago, right now, literally. I mean, they don't have precise timekeeping in battle, unfortunately, but sometime right now, literally 246 years ago, you had the two sides make their first initial contact here at Freeman's farm. Swearingen's riflemen come up. The picket from the center column, that's about 100 guys, redcoats. They're going to come out of the wood line and shots are exchanged. The British fire first, but the riflemen are too far distant and the bullets don't really have much of an effect at all. The riflemen rush forward. With their rifles, they can shoot far more accurately and at greater distance, and they're going to cut down a lot of the redcoats in the picket, including Major Forbes, the commander of the picket, who's wounded. Not killed, but wounded. And so the British are going to just panic and flee. They run back into the woods right there, right through the woods. Now, at this point, the riflemen are so elated at the retreating British that they chase them down, unfortunately, because Simon Fraser, with his elite troops, had heard the firing going on and immediately sent in reinforcements of light troops with a cannon exactly like that one right there. You see that light 3-pounder. A cannon and some a couple hundred light troops to try to support the center column. And they outflanked Swearingen's guys. Swearingen's guys were just completely taken aback by being outflanked, and they're going to scatter to the four winds. And this scattering panics the entire line of riflemen who are still arriving on Freeman's farm. The light infantry hadn't even gotten to the Freeman farm yet. They were still way in the back. And so Morgan's guys are just going to flee, and they're going to break, and they're going to run into the woods on the south side of the field. As for Swearingen, the captain of the forward company, he's captured by Fraser's men. He's even brought to Fraser for interrogation. So he's a prisoner of war, this captain of riflemen, because his guys had extended themselves too far beyond the support of the main body of riflemen. So the British, right now, they have the advantage, but the battle has only begun. Somewhere, and this is difficult, sometimes history, the documents don't give us all the information we would like to have or need, but sometime at some point later, the entire center column advances onto Freeman's farm proper. Now, ultimately what they did, the center column, was they had their 3 British redcoat regiments. You had over here the 21st Regiment of Foot, Burgoyne's only Royal Infantry Regiment, a regiment based out of Scotland. Then in the center, you had the 62nd Regiment of Foot, which was a majority, it's going to sound weird, but Irish and German regiment. There were a lot of Irishmen and Germans in the ranks, and some British as well. And then over there on the farm field, the 20th Regiment of Foot, a mostly English corps. So a lot of representation of various nationalities here in the British ranks. They had 4 6-pounders. It's hard to see, but there's a 6-pounder behind the shrubbery over there, and there should be some 6-pounders on the south side of the farm when we go there. But they had 4 of those, split up into 2 pair. 2 pair with the 62nd Regiment in the middle, and 2 pair over there with the non-Highland Scottish-based 21st Regiment of Foot. And Burgoyne instructed all of his troops to take off their knapsacks, take off the haversacks, which keep that food, almost 10 pounds worth of food. Take those off. Divest yourself of all of this heavy burden, because the battle that's forthcoming, you don't want to be bogged down with a bunch of camp equipage and stuff like that. So if you think of like battle in the Revolutionary War, like there's that famous Howard Pyle painting of the British marching up Bunker Hill, Breed's Hill, right? I love the painting, it's a great painting, but they're doing it with knapsacks and everything. No, that's not really how battle takes place. I'm not saying it never takes place like that, but certainly didn't happen there, and it did not happen here either at the battles of Freeman's Farm. The British had divested themselves of all that baggage, that encumbrance. They're ready to go into the fight, unhindered, unfettered, with heavy equipment, despite what the stereotypes might want to tell us of the stupid British soldier. They were not stupid. They were, in fact, pretty well trained for the forthcoming fight. The trick is, though, these guys, officers included in this force that was here, did not have a lot of experience. In fact, for 2 of the 3 battalion commanders, they had never commanded a battalion in battle in their lives. The brigadier general commanding had never commanded a brigade in battle in his life. General Burgoyne had never commanded an army in battle in his life. This was a first for a lot of these guys. And that's not just the top, that's the bottoms too. You know, the guys, the soldiers. Most of them had never been in combat before in their lives. Well trained? Yes. Experienced? No. No. And I think you'll see that, you know, that plays a part in battle. So that's our situation. Now, what we'll do is I think we will continue on our path, and we'll see what the Americans do to react to the British deployment here at Freeman's Farm.